Hello everyone, please tell me. Which city are you listening from? What time is it there? It had been a long day. One of those days where everything felt just a little bit off, but you couldn't quite put your finger on why. I was exhausted, mentally drained, and the only thing I wanted to do was get home, curl up with a book, and forget about everything. The city felt especially heavy that night, the air thick with humidity, the streets quieter than usual, as though the world had slowed down around me. I had missed the earlier bus, which meant I had to wait a little longer for the next one. I stood at the bus stop, hands stuffed in my pockets, watching the occasional car pass by, their headlights blurring in the wet pavement. The street lamps cast long, eerie shadows across the sidewalk, and the distant murmur of the city felt oddly distant, muffled by the weight of the night. I glanced at my watch. It was already past 10, and the thought of getting home to a quiet apartment was the only thing on my mind. Then I heard it. The faint sound of a bus engine coming down the street. The hum grew louder, and I could see the headlights coming around the corner. I straightened up, ready to board, but as the bus approached, something strange caught my attention. It was the way the bus looked off. It wasn't the usual city bus I rode every day. This one was older, worn, and the headlights had an eerie yellow tint, like the light was trapped in some foggy memory. The bus moved slowly, almost deliberately, like it was taking its time. But that wasn't what made me pause. No, it was the people inside. As the bus came closer, I saw the silhouettes of passengers through the dirty glass of the windows. I could barely make out their shapes, just vague, indistinct shadows, until the bus drew closer, and something happened that made my heart skip a beat. Every single person inside the bus, every single one turned and looked at me. Their heads all turned in perfect unison, their eyes wide and staring. The look was unsettling, like they had been waiting for me. But that wasn't even the most unnerving part. They waved. They didn't wave in a casual way, like a passing greeting. No, they waved with purpose. It was as though they knew me, like they were all acknowledging my presence with something deeper, something familiar, and asterisk UNNERVINGLY asterisk warm. Every face inside that bus, even the ones that were too far back to see clearly, were smiling, and they were waving at me like we had shared some kind of connection that I couldn't remember. I froze, my feet glued to the pavement. I couldn't explain what I was seeing. I didn't recognize anyone on that bus, and I had never seen a bus like that before. It was like something out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare, but I couldn't look away. I stood there, motionless, watching as the bus slowed to a crawl, its headlights flickering in that strange yellow glow. The people inside continued to wave, their smiles wide and knowing, almost as if they were welcoming me, inviting me in. My stomach turned, and then the bus passed. It was only a moment, but it felt like an eternity. The bus rolled past me, the sound of its engine fading into the night, and the streetlights flickered as it moved further down the road. I stared at the rear window, hoping to catch one last glimpse of the faces inside, but it was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the street. The usual hum of the city returned, but it felt different now. The quiet felt heavier, the night air colder. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to shake off the feeling that had crept over me. My hands were still stuffed in my pockets, but now they felt clammy. The warmth from the strange, friendly waves still lingered on my skin like an aftertaste, and I couldn't help but feel like I had just missed something important, something I wasn't supposed to see, something I wasn't supposed to be a part of. My mind raced with questions, but the one that stood out above all the others was, asterisk, who were they? Asterisk, and why did they wave at me? I had never seen any of those people before, not once. I stood at the bus stop, unsure of what to do next. The next bus should be here soon, I thought, but I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling in my chest. The whole situation felt wrong, like I had just witnessed something that wasn't meant for me to see. I turned around, my eyes scanning the street for any sign of the bus. But there was nothing. The road was empty, save for a few distant streetlights casting their long shadows on the pavement. I took a step toward the sidewalk, shaking my head, trying to dismiss the bizarre encounter. But then, something caught my eye. It was a reflection. I glanced at the nearby storefront window, where the light from the street lamp had cast a soft glow on the glass. For just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing behind me, someone dressed in the same coat I was wearing, standing just out of sight. I whipped around, but no one was there. My breath caught in my throat, and for a split second, I felt as though I was being watched. I quickly turned back toward the bus stop, my feet moving faster now. I didn't want to stay there any longer, not with the echo of those smiles still lingering in my mind. The street was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of something just out of reach, something watching me from the edges of my vision. It was as though the city itself had shifted somehow, and I wasn't sure I was in the same place anymore. A part of me wanted to wait for the next bus, but the thought of stepping onto it made my skin crawl. What if it came again? What if the people on that bus were still waiting for me? The idea of being on that bus, surrounded by those faces, their knowing smiles, made my stomach twist with unease. Instead, I turned and began walking home. My steps were quicker now, faster, as if I could outrun the feeling that had settled in my chest. I didn't know what had happened, and part of me didn't want to know. But as I walked, I couldn't help but wonder, asterisk, what if the bus would come again? What if they were waiting for me, just as they had waved, as if I had been expected? Asterisk, I didn't know, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The sun was low, casting long, soft shadows across the sidewalk as I walked through the city. It wasn't a busy hour, not yet, but there was that familiar hum in the air, the kind of energy you can feel without hearing it, a collective rush of people living their lives. There were a few pedestrians walking the same way, some lost in their phones, others in quiet conversation. I didn't mind it. It felt like home in the usual, comfortable way. I'd lived in the city for years now, a place I had grown to love, its rhythm syncing with my own. But something had changed. It was subtle at first, like the shifting of clouds that you notice only after they've moved. I couldn't put my finger on it, not exactly. It started when I realized the landmarks I passed every day, the old cafe on the corner, the bookstore with the faded sign, the library near the park, all seemed less familiar. Like they had been there, but now they weren't exactly how I remembered them. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the city was shifting around me. I paused at the crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, my fingers absently tapping the side of my phone. The noise of the streets seemed to drown out my thoughts. The steady rhythm of footsteps, cars passing, distant conversations filling the space. But then, between the noise and the bustle, there was a sound. A whisper, soft but clear, like someone had leaned in close and spoken in my ear. This is not your city. The words sent a shiver through me, a cold prickling sensation that ran down my spine. I glanced around instinctively. No one was close enough to have whispered that to me. The people around me seemed oblivious to everything, lost in their own worlds. But the whisper? It was there, so distinct, so certain. It felt as though it had come from the air itself, from the very space around me. I didn't move. The words lingered in my mind, repeating over and over in my head. This is not your city. My gaze flicked back to the street, my feet rooted to the ground. The light was still red, but I wasn't really looking at the crosswalk anymore. I was looking at the people who had passed by me so many times before, but now they felt different, like strangers who didn't belong here. The street signs that I knew so well seemed foreign now, the names of the streets not quite matching the memories I had of them. It wasn't just the signs that had changed. It was the entire atmosphere. The buildings were the same, the shops, the sidewalks, all of it seemed so familiar, and yet something was off. The colors were duller, the sounds muffled, as though I had stepped into a version of the city that didn't belong to me. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the strange feeling creeping up my neck. Maybe I was just tired, or stressed, or maybe I had been working too much lately, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I tried to breathe it off, but the sensation wouldn't leave. The light turned green. I stepped forward, half walking, half distracted, my feet moving of their own accord. The strange whisper echoed in my mind, and I felt a sudden sense of disorientation, like I was floating slightly above myself, observing. Everything around me felt like a distant memory, as though I was watching the world through a foggy glass. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. She was standing at the end of the street, just a little ways away, standing on the sidewalk with her back to me. She was tall, her hair dark and pulled back into a loose ponytail. She wore a long coat, the kind you'd see on a cold day, though it wasn't cold at all. She was facing a building, her body angled in a way that suggested she wasn't paying attention to the passers-by. But something about her still caught my eye. The way she stood there, still, yet somehow as if she were waiting. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to walk toward her. I found myself veering off the sidewalk, crossing the street toward where she stood. There was something magnetic about her, something that felt almost like fate pulling me forward. It was irrational, but I couldn't stop myself. As I approached, the city around me seemed to shift once again. The noise softened, the voices faded, and the space between me and her grew larger, more profound. I reached the spot where she stood, and without thinking, I stopped. She turned to face me then, her eyes meeting mine, and it was like the whole world fell away. She wasn't just looking at me. It felt as if she were seeing asterisk through asterisk me, like she knew something I didn't. Her eyes were dark, wide, and knowing. They were empty, but at the same time, full of everything. Without a word, she tilted her head slightly, the faintest smile curling on her lips. Then, in that soft, eerie whisper, she spoke again. Asterisk, this is not your city. Asterisk, the weight of the words hit me harder this time, and I felt something shift deep inside of me, like a cord that had snapped. It wasn't fear, exactly, but a deep, gnawing feeling that I had been walking through life in a place that wasn't meant for me. This wasn't my city. It couldn't be. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. My throat felt tight, as though the air itself had thickened, pressing against me, suffocating me. I wanted to run, to flee from this sensation, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, stuck in this moment between reality and something else. The woman didn't speak again. She simply watched me, her eyes never leaving mine. The smile remained, but it wasn't comforting. It wasn't malicious either. It was knowing, understanding, like she had been waiting for me to realize what had happened. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she turned away, her figure dissolving into the crowd as if she had never existed at all. The world snapped back to normal. The sounds of the street, the hum of the city, the rush of people. It all came flooding back. But I felt different. I felt like I had been torn out of something, like I had stepped through a door I wasn't supposed to open. I looked around, but the woman was gone. The city was the same as it had always been, the familiar streets, the same sounds, the same faces. But now they felt distant, like they weren't meant for me, like I was intruding. I kept walking, my feet carrying me forward without any real direction, lost in the uncertainty that clung to me like a fog. The whisper of her words kept echoing in my mind. Asterisk, this is not your city, asterisk. And for the first time in years, I truly believed her. It was one of those quiet evenings when the world feels suspended between the heat of the day and the cool of the night. The city felt oddly still, with the hum of traffic distant and the air unusually calm. I had been walking for a while, aimlessly, as my thoughts had drifted through the motions of daily life. The streets, familiar as they were, somehow seemed to have taken on a new energy today. It was a typical walk home after work, nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual route through the downtown area. But as I stood at the corner of the street, waiting for the light to change, I felt a strange shift in the air. The traffic signal flickered, and I stepped off the curb, my feet hitting the pavement with the usual rhythm. I had crossed this very intersection countless times before. It was a part of my daily routine, the kind of place you don't notice until something makes you stop. But tonight, it was different. The street signs that I had seen 1,000 times, the ones that marked the familiar routes, suddenly caught my attention in a way they never had before. I was walking across, heading toward the usual side of the block, when I glanced up at the street sign. And then, something happened. I stopped. The street name had changed. I blinked, unsure if I was seeing things. The sign used to read Evergreen Avenue, the street that led me home every night. But now it said something else. The new name was Unrecognizable Whistler's Lane. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. But before I could fully process the change, my feet had already carried me to the other side of the street. I stood still for a moment, staring at the new sign. Maybe I had just read it wrong. Maybe I had been tired, distracted, and misinterpreted it. But as I turned to look down the street, the disorienting feeling only deepened. The street I had walked every day had changed. The buildings on the corner looked the same. The old brickwork that I had passed 1,000 times was still there, but everything felt wrong. The street had become unfamiliar, as though it had transformed overnight into something I didn't recognize. I glanced across the street, expecting to see the familiar sign for Chestnut Road, the other street I crossed regularly, but instead I saw something else, Havenway Crescent. I froze. I knew these streets. I knew these names. I had passed them every single day without giving them a second thought. But now, they felt foreign, like they didn't belong. The world around me had shifted in a way that I couldn't explain, and I felt a pang of unease creep up my spine. I turned around, looking behind me to see if I had somehow missed something. I walked back to the intersection where I had crossed moments ago. The sign that had once said Evergreen Avenue was now labeled Whistler's Lane again. But this time, I noticed something else. The street signs on the other corners had changed too. Where there had once been Chestnut Road, now read Glenwood Parkway. The other street names were just as unfamiliar. My heart began to race as I looked down at the pavement beneath my feet. Nothing was familiar anymore. The world had taken on a surreal quality, as if the streets I had known so well had been erased and replaced by some new, uncharted place. My mind scrambled to make sense of it, but the logical explanations seemed to evaporate in the thickening confusion. I walked a few paces further, my eyes darting from one unfamiliar street name to the next. Every sign was different. Every street had changed. Oakwood Drive had become Briar Hill Road. Maple Street was now Winding Path. The names had all transformed into something that felt so alien, so *wrong*. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through molasses. I kept moving though, because I didn't know what else to do. The city felt smaller, but in a way that made it feel vast and unrecognizable. It was as if I had stepped into some other version of the world, where the familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by streets that didn't belong. I pulled out my phone, trying to find my location on the map. But when I opened the app, the street names there were just as strange. None of the streets matched the ones I knew, and the app's map seemed to shimmer, like it was glitching, flickering between what I thought I knew and the new reality that surrounded me. I closed the app, only to open it again, hoping I had missed something. But the streets were still wrong. Everything was wrong. I kept walking, my steps slow, my mind racing. What was happening? Had I somehow crossed into an alternate version of my city? Was it some kind of dream, or was I losing my grip on reality? The buildings around me looked the same, but the street names, the very fabric of the city, had changed. The more I looked, the more unsettled I became. There were people on the streets, too, but none of them seemed to notice the changes. They walked past, talking, laughing, seemingly unbothered by the unfamiliar street signs. I wanted to stop one of them, ask them what was happening, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I felt like an intruder, like I didn't belong in this version of the city. My head spun as I turned down another street, hoping to find something that made sense, something that would snap me out of this confusion. But the street sign that greeted me now read Sable Way. I could feel my breath quicken, the world around me closing in. I had crossed the street, and in doing so, I had crossed into something else. Something that was both familiar and utterly alien. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. I wanted to go home, but which direction was home now? The street names had changed, the familiar landmarks were gone, and even the air felt different, heavier, like I was breathing in someone else's world. I turned again, walking aimlessly, hoping to find something that would explain it all. But no matter which way I went, the names stayed the same. The streets had shifted, and so had my sense of reality. I had crossed the street, and now I wasn't sure I could ever find my way back. There was no going home now. Not to the street names I knew. Not to the life I thought I had known. I was walking down the quiet street, the evening air thick with the scent of wet pavement and the faint hum of distant traffic. The sun had just set, leaving behind a pale orange glow on the horizon that made everything feel soft and distant. I had always loved the quiet at this hour, when the world seemed to slow down, when the noise of the day faded away into something more still and introspective. But tonight, something was different. I was passing by the row of old buildings, each one standing like a forgotten memory, when I noticed the alley. It was a narrow thing, barely wide enough to be called a path, with walls on either side covered in layers of peeling paint and ivy. I had walked past it hundreds of times before, never really thinking much of it. But tonight, for some reason, it caught my attention. I couldn't explain why. Something about the way the light from the street lamp hit the entrance made it seem inviting in a way that felt almost too personal. I stood at the edge of the alley for a moment, staring into the darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly. A strange, inexplicable urge tugged at me, pulling me toward it. I took a step forward, my shoes tapping softly on the cobblestones as I moved deeper into the alley. The air here felt different, heavier, more charged with something I couldn't name. Then, just as I reached the middle of the alley, I saw it. A door. It was an old wooden door, set into the wall of the building to my left. It wasn't a door I had ever seen before, and yet it felt oddly familiar. It looked out of place, as though it didn't belong here, in this neglected, forgotten part of the street. The wood was weathered, the paint chipped and peeling, but it had a certain kind of presence to it, as if it had been standing there for far longer than I had been alive. And then, as I stood there, staring at it, the door creaked open. The sound was subtle at first, a low groan of old wood shifting against its frame, but it was enough to send a chill through me. I didn't move. My heart seemed to skip a beat. For some reason, the sight of the door opening felt like an invitation, not just to step inside, but to step into something else. Something I couldn't quite place. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my hand hovering just above the doorframe as I moved closer. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air around me changed. It was as though I had entered a different world entirely. The sounds of the street faded into nothingness, and the heavy silence enveloped me like a blanket. And then I smelled it. It was a scent I knew. A scent I had not smelled in years, but the moment it hit my nose, I knew. It was the smell of home. It was the smell of my childhood, the familiar scent of warm wood, old leather, and something earthy, the way my mother's house had always smelled when I was a child. I had forgotten how much I had missed it until that very moment. The smell was so vivid, so real, that I felt like I could reach out and touch it. Like I was standing in the hallway of the house I had grown up in. The one I hadn't visited in so long. The house that had been sold after my parents moved away. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the scent wash over me. I could almost hear the faint rustling of paper, the distant ticking of a clock on the mantel, the soft hum of life going on in the background. I remembered the way my mother used to call me in from the backyard, the sound of her voice echoing through the house, the warmth of the kitchen where we used to eat dinner together. But as quickly as the memories came, they started to fade. The smell of home grew stronger, more intense, and I felt an overwhelming pull toward it. I took another step inside, the creaky floorboards underfoot groaning as I moved deeper into the room. It was dark, but there was a faint light coming from somewhere deep inside, as if the room had its own warmth, its own life. As I walked, the air grew warmer, the familiar scent of my childhood wrapping itself around me like an old, comforting blanket. The door behind me slammed shut with a sudden force, and I jumped, my heart skipping a beat. But I didn't turn around. I couldn't. There was something pulling me forward, something that felt too important to ignore. I reached the edge of the room, my breath shallow in my chest, and as I stepped closer to the source of the light, I saw it. A figure standing by the window, their back to me, bathed in the soft glow of the light. The figure was familiar, but I couldn't place them, not at first. They were standing so still, so silent, that for a moment I thought I had imagined them. But then they turned. It was my mother. Or rather, it was a version of her. Her face was older, worn with time, but the eyes were unmistakable. The same eyes I had seen countless times growing up. The same eyes that had looked at me with warmth, with love, with understanding. "Come in," she said, her voice soft and soothing, like it had always been when she used to call me home. Her words wrapped around me like a lullaby, pulling me closer, urging me to step deeper into the room. "It's time to come back." I froze. My chest tightened as I stared at her, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mother had passed away years ago, and yet, here she was, standing before me in a room I couldn't recognize, a room that felt like it had been waiting for me. The scent of home grew stronger still, overwhelming, intoxicating. I reached out, my hand trembling, but before I could touch her, the room shifted. The light flickered, casting long shadows across the walls, and suddenly, the warmth turned cold. The figure of my mother blurred, her face fading into something else, something unfamiliar, something wrong. The smell of home disappeared, replaced by something darker, more unsettling. The room around me seemed to collapse in on itself, the walls narrowing, the light dimming. until all that was left was the faintest whisper of a memory I couldn't hold on to. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the door slammed open again, and the alley stretched out before me, empty and silent. The familiar scent of home was gone, replaced by the cold, sterile air of the street. I stood there, breathless, confused, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what had just happened. I didn't know what I had just seen. But as I turned and walked back toward the street, the only thing I could feel was the unsettling sensation that something had changed, that something had shifted in the air, and that the house I had once known, the home I had long left behind, was never truly gone. It was still there, waiting for me to come back. But I didn't know if I ever would. The moment I walked into the hotel lobby, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the decor, though it was old-fashioned, or the musty smell that hung in the air like stale memories. No, it was the feeling of it. The lobby felt like a relic, as if it were caught somewhere between eras, a place that shouldn't exist in the present, but somehow did. I had no business being there. It started as an impulse, really. I had been walking around the city, lost in my thoughts, trying to shake off the weight of a long week, when I found myself standing in front of the hotel. It was one of those buildings that blends into the background of city life. Too ordinary to stand out, but old enough to hold some strange, quiet mystery. I didn't plan to go inside, but something, a pull, a curiosity, made me cross the threshold. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't the usual hum of a hotel lobby, the quiet chatter of guests, or the distant clink of coffee cups. No, this place was dead still. The only sound was the soft squeak of my shoes against the polished marble floor. There were no staff at the desk, no one sitting in the armchairs scattered around the room. Just an eerie emptiness, like the hotel was waiting for something to happen. I glanced around, my eyes falling on the walls. Framed photographs lined the space, each one depicting scenes from the city's past. Old buildings, streets crowded with vintage cars, crowds of people dressed in clothes I barely recognized. But then, my gaze froze. There, on the far wall, was a photo I couldn't explain. It wasn't a photograph of the city or any landmark I recognized. It wasn't a photograph of some long-forgotten gathering or celebration. It was a portrait. And not just any portrait. It was me. I could see my face clearly in the picture, even though I knew I had never been in that hotel, or at least, I thought I hadn't. The photo was in black and white, the edges faded with age, and it showed me standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. I was younger, much younger. The clothes I wore were from another time, the kind you'd see in old films, with a suit, jacket, and trousers, the edges of my hair neatly combed. But what struck me most wasn't my age or the clothing, it was the expression on my face. I didn't recognize the version of myself in the photo. There was something strange about the way I was standing, something unsettling in the set of my eyes. I didn't look like the person I was now. I looked like someone else. Someone distant, disconnected from the person I had become. I took a few steps closer, my heart racing, my breath catching in my throat. How could this be? How could there be a photograph of me from a time I hadn't lived through? I reached out, my fingers trembling, but before I could touch the frame, a voice broke the silence. "You found it, didn't you?" I spun around, startled. A man was standing near the desk now, one I hadn't noticed before. He was tall, dressed in an old-fashioned bellhop uniform, his face expressionless but somehow familiar. He didn't look at me directly. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the photograph. "Found what?" I asked, my voice sounding weaker than I intended. He smiled faintly, as if he knew something I didn't. "The photo," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "It's been waiting for you. It always does." I didn't know what to say. My mind was reeling, unable to process the flood of questions rushing through me. How could that photo exist? How could it have been taken of me in 1952? "Who are you?" I asked, my words coming out more firmly now, though my voice still wavered. "What is this place?" The man didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, watching me with those tired, knowing eyes. Then, slowly, he spoke again. "Do you believe in time, in the way it bends, the way it loops? Some places hold memories, hold asterisk moments, asterisk, and this hotel, it holds all of them. People come and go, but certain things stay. Asterisk, you asterisk stayed." His words made no sense, and yet they resonated with something deep within me, like a memory I couldn't reach. I could feel a strange pull in my chest, a sense that what he was saying, what had just happened, was somehow true, though I had no idea how. I looked back at the photograph, the young version of myself staring back, as if waiting for something. I felt a sudden surge of dizziness, as though the room were spinning, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. "You're here now," the man said quietly, almost to himself. "And so is the photo. Everything has a reason." I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, this isn't possible. I've never been here. I've never taken that photo. I don't understand." The man's expression softened, but there was no comfort in it. "You've been here before, in another time, and you'll be back again." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The hotel seemed to grow colder, the air heavier, like I was breathing in something ancient. I wanted to leave. I wanted to turn and walk out of the lobby, to escape this strange, suffocating feeling, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, caught between the past and the present, between the photo and whatever truth lay beneath it. The man spoke again, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We all leave our marks here, whether we remember or not. And sometimes, we return. Time isn't as linear as you think." I didn't know what to say, but before I could ask him more, the air in the room seemed to shift. The walls grew dimmer, the corners of the room darkening in a way that wasn't quite right. The photograph on the wall flickered, like a faulty television screen. And then, suddenly, it was gone. Just like that. I blinked, trying to adjust my vision, but the wall was empty now. No photo. No image of me from 1952. Just an ordinary, dusty frame hanging on the wall, empty and waiting for something to fill it. I turned back to the man, but he was gone too. The lobby was empty once again, the silence now deafening. I stood there for a long moment, unsure of what to do. my heart pounding in my chest. I finally stepped back, my legs shaky beneath me, and slowly walked toward the door. I glanced back one last time, half expecting the photograph to reappear, but there was nothing. Just the hotel, its lobby now empty, as if it had never been anything more than a fleeting moment in time. When I stepped out into the street, I felt the weight of the world press down on me. The city outside was still the same, the noise of traffic and distant voices filling the air. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind in that hotel. Something important. As I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder, how long had it been since I had really been there? How long had it been since I had taken that photo? And when would I return? It had been a long, tiring day. I had spent most of it running errands, handling a million small tasks that felt more like obligations than actual accomplishments. When the evening finally rolled around, I found myself craving a moment of quiet, a breath of fresh air, a break from the whirlwind of the day. So, I decided to take a detour through the park on my way home. The park had always been a place of solace for me, a place where I could sit and think, or just let my mind wander, away from the noise of the world. I hadn't been there in a while, but I knew the path well. The way the trees arched overhead, the sound of the fountain gently bubbling in the distance. The stone benches that seemed to invite you to sit for a while. It was late, the light from the street lamps casting long shadows across the path. And the air was cooler now, a slight breeze rustling the leaves around me. The park felt quiet, almost empty, except for the occasional distant voice or the rustle of small animals hidden in the underbrush. As I walked, I found myself heading toward the fountain, drawn to its soft, rhythmic sound. The fountain had always been an odd piece of the park. Old, worn, with intricate carvings around the base that I never quite understood, and the water always flowing, no matter the season. I had seen it many times, but tonight something felt different. There was a subtle energy in the air, as if the fountain had a purpose it wasn't sharing. It was the kind of feeling you get when something is just a little asterisk to asterisk still, like a strange calm before a storm. I walked closer, my shoes crunching softly against the gravel path. The fountain, with its worn stone edges and moss growing between the cracks, looked exactly as I remembered it, but something was off. There was a glow around the water, faint but unmistakable, like the light from the lampposts was refracted in a way it shouldn't have been. I paused for a moment, just standing there, looking at the water. I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to look closer as I did. Something caught my eye, something floating in the water. At first I thought it was just a reflection, but no. It was something else entirely. Letters, small, clear letters, slowly floating and rearranging themselves in the water. I blinked, unsure if I was seeing things. My heart picked up pace, but I couldn't look away. The letters shifted in the water, turning and swirling as though they were alive, forming words one by one, as if they had been written by an invisible hand. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. The letters seemed to form an incoherent jumble. But then, slowly, it became clear. The letters spelled out something that felt like a punch to the gut, as though the universe had decided it was time for me to know something I didn't want to know. The letters settled. The message was simple, but it made my blood run cold. Asterisk, asterisk, today. Asterisk, asterisk, it wasn't a mistake. The word was crystal clear, as if it had been etched into the water itself. I took a step back, my heart racing, the cool breeze suddenly feeling much colder against my skin. Asterisk, today. Asterisk, I hadn't expected anything like this, not in a million years. I stared at the water, the word today still floating there, as if daring me to make sense of it. It wasn't a date. It wasn't a time. It was just the word asterisk, today, asterisk. But it felt ominous, like a clue to something I didn't understand. Why would the fountain, of all things, show me this? Why now? I was alone in the park, but it felt like I wasn't. Like something or someone was watching. The air around me felt thicker, heavier, as though the weight of the word in the water was too much to bear. I stepped forward again, trying to see if the letters would change, but they didn't. The water had become still, as if the fountain itself had stopped flowing just for this moment. And then, almost as if the water had absorbed it, the letters began to fade, slowly, until there was nothing left but the faintest shimmer where they had been. I looked around, half expecting someone to appear, to explain this to me, to tell me I was overreacting. But there was no one. The park was still empty, the sound of the water in the fountain the only noise, its steady bubbling somehow comforting now. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, wondering if I had imagined it, but the message was still there, haunting me. Asterisk today. Asterisk, the word echoed in my mind. It wasn't just a message from the fountain. It felt like a message from somewhere much deeper. From the fabric of reality itself. I turned to leave, my mind whirling, but something tugged at me. A nagging sensation. I had to know. I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't let it go. So, I did something I never thought I would do. I walked closer to the fountain, bending down to peer into the water, hoping that I was wrong, that I had just imagined the whole thing. But as I gazed into the clear depths of the fountain, I saw something else, a reflection, not mine. The face that stared back at me from the water wasn't mine. It was a face I didn't recognize, yet somehow, it felt so familiar. It was someone I knew someone I had known once a long time ago. A part of my past that had slipped away without me realizing. The reflection was smiling at me, a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't look away. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The face in the water began to speak, its mouth moving in slow, deliberate words, but the sound was muffled, distant. It was as if the words were coming from underwater, too far to hear clearly, but the message was there. I finally stepped back, my legs unsteady. The reflection faded as I moved, the water rippling once more. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. Like the world had tilted just slightly off its axis. And then I realized something. It was still today. The fountain had shown me the word asterisk today, asterisk. The face, the reflection, the unsettling feeling that I had just witnessed something impossible. It was all connected. I wasn't sure how or why, but I knew one thing for certain. I had been shown a glimpse of something I wasn't ready to understand. I turned and left the park, my mind still spinning. But I couldn't shake the feeling that today, whatever asterisk today asterisk was, wasn't just any ordinary day. Something was waiting. Something had already happened, and I had no idea what it meant. It was one of those evenings that felt too quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're standing at the edge of a dream you can't quite wake up from. The sky was a soft, dusky gray, and the streets were empty, save for the occasional figure in the distance, moving as if they had somewhere to be but were too tired to be in a hurry. I had spent most of the day at work, and now, as the evening settled in, I was heading home. I didn't feel in a rush. I never do after a long day. The city always feels different at this time, slower somehow, as if everyone else is retreating into their own spaces. The air had a slight chill to it, the kind that makes your breath puff in small clouds, and the streets smelled faintly of rain, even though none had fallen in hours. As I walked, I found myself taking the long way home, not really thinking about it. Just walking. There's something about the rhythm of the city, the way it moves at its own pace, that puts me into a kind of trance. I watched the streetlights flicker to life above me, one by one, and the sound of my footsteps echoed against the pavement, sharp and clear in the growing quiet. I didn't notice her at first. She was standing by the lamppost at the end of the street, facing away from me, her figure shrouded in the soft, golden glow of the streetlight. She was tall, her silhouette sharp against the backdrop of the dimming sky. Her long coat flared out behind her, the edges catching the breeze just enough to make it look like she was standing still, but moving at the same time. For a moment, I thought she was a passerby, waiting for someone, or maybe someone just lost in thought like me. But then, she turned. I don't know why it startled me so much, but it did. Her movement was too smooth, too sudden, like the turn of a clock hand when you weren't looking. And when she looked at me, her eyes were familiar, but not. There was something about her expression, the way she held herself, that made my stomach twist. It was like I had seen her before, but I couldn't place where. The look in her eyes was the kind of look someone gives you when they expect something, when they know something you don't. And then, without any hesitation, she said it. "You're late." The words cut through the air like a knife. Her voice was soft but firm, like she had been waiting for me, expecting me. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. I wasn't sure what to say. My heart skipped a beat, my mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. Late? Late for what? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I couldn't remember when I had been gone. The last few hours had felt like they slipped through my fingers without me realizing it, like I had lost track of time entirely. I looked around, but everything felt strange. The street, the buildings, the pavement beneath my feet, they all felt like they belonged to a memory I couldn't place. Like I had stepped into a scene from a dream I had forgotten the moment I woke up. I took a step toward her, my legs feeling heavier with each movement. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding foreign to me, as though I hadn't spoken in days. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, studying me in a way that made my skin prickle. The wind blew her hair across her face, and for a moment, I could have sworn her eyes glinted with something sharp. Something like recognition, but it was gone so quickly, I couldn't be sure. "You really don't remember, do you?" she said, her tone softer now, almost pitying. "It's all right. It's been a long time, a long time." The words echoed in my head, but they didn't make sense. I had just left my apartment, only a few minutes ago. I had just walked out the door like I always do. So why did it feel like I had been away, like I had somehow missed something important? "What are you talking about?" I asked, taking another step closer, my confusion growing into a strange kind of fear. "I haven't been gone." But she held up a hand, silencing me. She wasn't looking at me anymore. Her gaze had shifted to something in the distance, a far-off look in her eyes, as though she could see something I couldn't. "You should have been here a long time ago," she said, her voice softer now, as if she were speaking to herself. "But it's too late now. It's too late for all of us." I froze. The air around me seemed to shift, like a sudden shift in pressure, and for the first time, I felt something wrong about everything. The street, the buildings, even the soft yellow light from the lamppost, it all seemed to stretch, warping in ways I couldn't explain. The ground beneath my feet felt uneven, like the pavement itself was shifting, changing, turning into something that didn't belong. "Who are you?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. My voice shook, and I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my chest. "What do you mean? What happened?" But when I looked at her again, she was gone. 1 second, she was standing there, staring at me, and the next, nothing. Just the empty street, the lamppost flickering in the wind, and the soft echo of my own breath in the quiet. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I looked around, but the street was empty. There was no sign of her, no trace that she had ever been there at all. I turned around, panic flooding me. I didn't know where I was anymore, didn't know why everything felt off, like the world had been altered in some way that I couldn't understand. I walked faster now, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness, but the weight of something strange, something distant, pressed against my chest. I passed a few more buildings, each one looking the same and yet somehow unfamiliar. The quiet of the street, the fading light of the street lamps, all seemed to stretch on endlessly. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped out of time, out of place, and that I was only just now realizing it. I turned a corner, and suddenly, everything was different. The street I was on no longer felt like the same street I had walked down earlier. The buildings looked older, more decayed, the air heavier with a strange, oppressive weight. The streetlights buzzed overhead, flickering faintly, but their lights seemed dimmer, as though they had been struggling to stay lit for far too long. And then, as I looked up, I saw it, the bus stop sign, hanging crookedly, just a few feet away, the one I had passed by every day for years, the one that I had never noticed before. But now, standing in front of it, I could see it clearly, like it had always been there. And beneath it, written in faded black ink, was a name, my name. I reached out to touch it, my fingers trembling, but before I could, the ground beneath me shifted again. The street started to blur, the edges of the buildings warping, stretching, pulling me toward something I couldn't understand. I closed my eyes, trying to shake the feeling off, but when I opened them again, I was standing alone in the quiet street. Nothing around me but shadows and the distant hum of the night. The woman was gone, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was late for something. Something I was supposed to have remembered. Something that had been waiting for me just beyond the edge of time. It was late in the evening when I decided to take a walk, something I rarely did. I was feeling restless, a bit uneasy, like my body was telling me to go somewhere without knowing where. The night was warm for autumn, the air thick with humidity that seemed to slow everything down. Even the trees, whose leaves barely rustled in the quiet breeze. The city felt like it was holding its breath, everything still, and for some reason, that made me more anxious than comforted. I wasn't even sure where I was headed. My mind just carried me down the streets, through familiar paths, until I reached the park. The park had always been a quiet place, especially at night. The swings were barely moving, and the climbing frame was just a shadow against the darkening sky. It used to be my childhood playground, the place where I spent hours running, climbing, laughing with friends I don't see anymore. I hadn't come here in years. Maybe that was why it felt so strange when I stood at the edge of the path and saw the familiar outlines of the playground. It was still there, untouched by time, as though no years had passed at all. I didn't expect to linger, but I found myself walking toward the swings. The same ones I used to jump off of with my friends when we dared each other. The smell of the earth and the faint scent of old grass brought memories rushing back. I could almost hear the sound of my own laughter, the laughter of my childhood echoing in my ears. But then, as I stood in the soft glow of a nearby streetlight, I heard something else, a laugh. It wasn't loud, just a soft chuckle, almost hidden in the night air. At first, I thought it was the wind, or perhaps someone else in the park. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. It was a laugh I recognized, a sound I hadn't heard in so many years. It was mine. I turned toward the source of the sound, my heart picking up speed in my chest. The park was empty. There were no other figures standing under the trees, no groups of people gathered around the swings. I walked a little further, closer to the sound, a strange pull urging me forward, and with each step, the laugh seemed to grow louder, clearer, and oddly familiar. It was as if I was hearing myself, my childhood self, laughing from the past. I kept walking, my feet moving almost on their own. The playground stretched before me, the swings gently swaying in the night air. And then, just beyond them, at the far end of the park, I saw something. Or rather, someone. It was a child, standing by the old wooden fence, facing away from me. They were alone, their small figure almost swallowed by the shadow of the trees behind them. I felt a chill slide up my spine, though it wasn't from the coolness of the night air. There was something oddly out of place about this figure, about the way they stood so still, as though waiting for me. I took a step toward them, my breath catching in my throat. And then, just as if on cue, the laugh echoed again. This time, it was unmistakable. It was my asterisk laugh. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The child turned slowly, and my heart nearly stopped. They weren't just a stranger, some random kid playing alone in the park. They looked like me. But they weren't just a copy of me. They were me, asterisk, younger me. Asterisk, the child smiled, a playful, mischievous grin that I knew too well. It was a grin I used to wear when I had nothing to worry about, when the world was still simple. The kind of grin I wore when I was standing in this very park, climbing on the monkey bars, feeling like I could conquer the world. But this wasn't right. This wasn't the innocent joy I remembered. There was something about the way the child stared at me that made my chest tighten, as though they knew something I didn't, something I had forgotten. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, watching them. They tilted their head, as if waiting for me to approach, and the laugh came again, light and free, ringing through the silence of the park. The child began to walk toward the swings, their footsteps soft against the ground. I followed, my feet dragging behind me as though they were weighted with something heavy. The child climbed onto one of the swings, their legs swinging in that carefree motion that only children can have. The sound of their laugh floated back to me again, and it struck me like a punch to the gut. It was my laugh. My laugh from years ago, echoing in the air. I moved closer, the weight of the past pressing on my chest. I stood there, just out of reach of the swings, watching the child. But no matter how much I tried to move closer, no matter how much I willed my legs to carry me forward, I couldn't get any closer. The child's eyes locked with mine, and their smile deepened, knowing, almost mocking. And then, the swing stopped. Everything went quiet. The laugh faded. The night seemed to hold its breath. The child didn't move. They just sat there, staring at me, the smile never leaving their face. And I realized, with a sudden, sickening clarity, that the park was empty again. The swings no longer moved. The laughter was gone. Everything that had felt so familiar, so comforting, was now just a shell of what it had once been. The shadow of the past lingered in the air, heavy and oppressive. I wanted to run. To get away from that child, from the playground, from the memory of who I had been. But I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the child who was asterisk me, asterisk, yet not me. For a long moment, we just stood there. And then, as if the weight of time itself had caught up with me, the child began to fade. Slowly, their form blurred at the edges, like a photograph that had been left out in the rain. And then, in a blink, they were gone. I stood there alone, the silence of the park settling around me. The streetlights flickered above, and the swing swayed gently in the wind, empty. The air felt different now, colder, as though the whole moment had been a dream, a trick of the mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into a memory, a place that had once been mine, but was now lost, forgotten. I turned to leave, but as I walked away, I could still hear it. The faintest echo of a laugh. My laugh, fading into the night. It was one of those days where everything seemed to blur together. The kind of day where time drips by slowly, and you can't quite remember when you last felt truly present. I had spent most of the afternoon running errands, bouncing between stores, dealing with the usual mundane details of life that never seemed to get easier, even when I thought I'd figured it all out. The city was a bit quieter than usual, the usual hum of traffic softened by an early fog that hadn't quite lifted. I don't know why I decided to take the bus home that day. I usually walked, but my legs were tired, and the thought of sitting for a few minutes sounded like a relief. The bus stop wasn't far, just a block from where I was, and I was in a bit of a hurry. The air had a chill to it, and the low gray clouds overhead promised rain at any moment. I had my head down, my coat wrapped tightly around me to shield myself from the cold. The rhythm of my footsteps loud in the silence of the street. It was an ordinary walk. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just the usual drone of my thoughts as I passed by the quiet storefronts. The flickering neon signs in the windows offering discounts I wasn't interested in. I didn't notice anything particularly strange until I reached the bus stop. It was the same one I had stood at 100 times before, just at the corner. The small metal sign rusted slightly, but still legible. There was nothing special about it. Just another stop in a long line of others. The kind of place you barely notice, except when you need it. But when I got closer, I saw something that made me stop. The sign read, "my name, *." At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was just a simple bus stop sign, the kind with the name of the street printed in faded black ink on a white background. But there it was, bold and unmistakable, my name, right in the middle of the sign, like it belonged there. The kind of name you only see on a piece of mail or a document that's been specifically addressed to you. It was a simple name, nothing unusual about it. And yet, it felt completely out of place on that sign. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. There was no possible way it was a coincidence. The sign didn't say Main Street or Elm Road like it usually did. It said *, my full name *, clear as day. How could that be? I hadn't given anyone my name to put on a bus stop. I didn't know anyone who would do that as a prank, but it didn't make sense. I shook my head, almost laughing at myself for being startled. Maybe it was a mistake, a typo. Maybe the sign was meant for someone else, and it was just a weird coincidence. I glanced around, expecting to see someone else waiting at the stop. Maybe someone who had placed the sign there as a joke. But the street was empty. There was no one else in sight. The bus wasn't due for another 10 minutes, so I sat down on the metal bench, trying to steady my nerves. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my messages without really seeing them. I was trying to distract myself, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, but the image of the sign, with my name printed so clearly on it, wouldn't leave my mind. A few moments later, the bus pulled up, and the doors hissed open. I stood up, still uneasy, and walked toward the door. As I stepped inside, I glanced at the driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face. His eyes flickered over me for just a moment, then he looked back at the road ahead, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. I found an empty seat near the back of the bus and sat down, but the unsettling feeling didn't fade. The sound of the engine rumbling beneath me, the gentle hum of the bus moving through the streets, only added to the unease. My mind kept returning to the sign, Asterisk, why was my name there? Asterisk, who had done it? The bus ride wasn't long, but every stop we passed, every turn the bus made, felt like it was stretching out longer than it should. I couldn't focus on anything else, my thoughts looping in on themselves. I kept glancing around the bus, half expecting someone to be watching me, but the seats around me were empty. The bus was nearly silent, except for the occasional click of the engine and the soft rattle of the windows. When I finally arrived at my stop, I didn't wait for the doors to open completely before stepping off. I was too eager to leave. I felt like I needed to get away from that bus, from the sign, from the sensation that something was following me. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I quickly pulled my coat tighter around me, the cool air biting at my skin. I walked the short distance to my apartment building, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled in my chest. But when I reached the entrance, I stopped. The building's front door was opened slightly ajar, like someone had left it unattended. I didn't remember anyone telling me about maintenance or anything that could explain it. It wasn't like the door was wide open, but it was just enough to make me hesitate, and when I pushed it open I was greeted by a faint sound, something like a whisper. Soft and far away, but still unmistakable. I stood in the entryway for a long moment, listening, straining to make out the source of the sound. But there was nothing but the faint echo of my breath in the stillness. And then, as I closed the door behind me, I heard it. The faint whisper again, clear this time, almost like a sigh. Asterisk, you didn't forget, did you? Asterisk, I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. It wasn't anyone else's voice. It was mine. My own voice, but it wasn't coming from me. It was coming from somewhere deeper within the building, a voice I had never heard before. I turned around, my pulse racing. The hallway was dark, silent, empty. No one was there. The building seemed to stretch around me, its corners and walls suddenly unfamiliar, as though I had never truly seen them before. I hurried up the stairs to my apartment, the feeling of being watched lingering in the back of my mind. But as I opened the door, I found something strange waiting for me on the kitchen table, a piece of paper. My name was written on it, neatly printed in the same handwriting I had seen before on the bus stop sign. It read, Asterisk, I've been waiting for you. Asterisk, I don't know how it got there. I don't know how it happened. But I haven't been able to shake the feeling that, somehow, this was only the beginning. I don't know why I decided to take that walk. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the kind of evening that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of rain, and the streets were unusually empty. The familiar hum of the city felt muted, as if someone had turned the volume down. The usual noise from passing cars, distant conversations, and the occasional footsteps on the pavement all felt distant, lost. It wasn't unsettling, exactly, but it made everything feel a bit off. I wasn't in a rush to get anywhere. I'd been cooped up in my apartment all day, working on a project that required more caffeine than I cared to admit. I needed fresh air, a change of pace. So, I grabbed my jacket and left, without any particular destination in mind. I found myself walking down streets I had passed 100 times before but never really noticed. It was like the city had shifted in the hours I'd been indoors. Nothing major, but there was a slight dissonance, a subtle unease that I couldn't shake. Like something was missing, though I couldn't place what. Maybe it was the quiet. The air felt too still. The streets seemed cleaner, the trees more vibrant, and yet, everything was just off. I wandered through a few blocks until I reached an old building I had always been curious about. It had been empty for as long as I could remember, its windows boarded up, the paint peeling off the walls in jagged layers. I had always thought it was abandoned, but something about it called to me tonight. The place had a certain weight to it, a certain presence, even in its decaying state. But as I stood there, just gazing at it, I realized it looked different than I remembered. The charred remnants of the building's shell stood at the edge of the street, its blackened walls a stark contrast to the surrounding buildings. It had burned down, I thought. I had to remind myself. I had heard about the fire a year ago. The building had been condemned after the blaze, the firefighters working for hours to control the damage. I could still remember the photos of the charred remains that had circulated on the news. It was gone, reduced to ash. The building that once stood there, with its cracked windows and faint echoes of life, no longer existed. Yet, as I stared at the spot where it once stood, something caught my eye. There, on the steps, the very steps that used to lead up to the entrance, sat a woman. She was wearing a long coat, dark and worn, with her hair loosely tucked under a faded scarf. It was the kind of outfit you wear when you're trying to blend in, to disappear, but there was something about the way she sat, hunched over, that immediately felt out of place. She looked tired, like someone who had been waiting for far too long. The sight of her, sitting there so calmly in front of the remnants of the building, made my stomach tighten. I couldn't explain why, but she felt wrong. I stood there, frozen, not knowing whether to approach or turn away. The streets around me were still empty, and I felt like I was the only one who had noticed her. I couldn't hear the usual buzz of the city, the conversations, the cars, nothing. The world seemed to have quieted down around her, like the space between us had expanded. After what felt like an eternity, I took a step forward. My feet moved without much thought, carrying me toward the woman. My heart raced, not out of fear, but out of an overwhelming sense of something that felt like I had stumbled onto a scene I wasn't meant to see, like a moment in time that wasn't supposed to exist. I was close now, just a few feet away from the woman, and yet, she didn't seem to notice me. She didn't look up, didn't move. Her shoulders were hunched in, her hands resting on the steps beside her, fingers barely brushing against the cracked concrete. I could barely make out the shape of her face beneath the scarf, but there was something about her posture, something hollow, like a person who had long since given up on the world around them. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, a chill ran down my spine. The wind had picked up, the air colder now, but I didn't move. Something in me told me I shouldn't, that I was too close to this scene, too close to whatever it was that had drawn me here. I took another step forward, my gaze flicking between the woman and the steps she was sitting on. Something was wrong with the place. The steps themselves, which should have been cracked and worn from years of neglect, were pristine, as though they had never been touched by time. The stone was smooth, the edges sharp, the light from the street lamp above casting long shadows across them, stretching unnaturally long, reaching out toward the woman. And then I saw it. Just beneath her feet, where she sat, there was something I hadn't noticed before. A small, faintly glowing ember, as though something deep inside the ground was still smoldering. It wasn't much, just a faint flicker of light, but it was enough to make my breath catch in my throat. The fire had been here, I knew that. But this wasn't right. It was as if something had never quite finished burning. Something was still alive beneath the rubble, beneath the remnants of the building. I took another step back, my eyes locked on the ember. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. I wanted to step forward, to touch it, to see if it was real. But I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy, as though they were stuck in place, rooted to the ground. My mind raced. Was this some kind of after effect of the fire? Had it burned so deeply that even now, weeks, months later, something lingered? Or was it something else? I turned my gaze back to the woman, but she wasn't there anymore. The steps were empty, the space in front of me nothing but cold, unmarked stone. She had vanished. In an instant, just gone. I stood there for a long moment, unsure of what I had just witnessed. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. I wanted to leave, to turn away and forget what I had seen. But something kept me rooted there, staring at the empty steps, my eyes fixed on the space where the woman had once sat. I turned to leave, the strange, unsettling feeling still clinging to me, the ember still flickering in my mind. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the thought that whatever had burned that building down, whatever had kept the fire alive even after everything else had died, wasn't finished yet. It wasn't just the building that had been consumed. The woman, the steps, the ember, they were all part of something. Something I couldn't understand. Something that felt too close, too personal. Something that had burned through more than just stone. And I didn't know if it would ever truly stop. I took a shortcut home that night. It wasn't unusual, really. I'd walked this path 100 times before. It was a small, quiet side street that cut through the back of the neighborhood, where the houses stood closer together, their front yards shaded by tall trees. The kind of street you'd hardly notice unless you were looking for it, nestled between main roads. But I liked it. It was peaceful, always quieter than the others. The sort of place where you could lose yourself in thought and just let the world pass by. The rain had just begun, a soft drizzle at first, the kind of rain that seems to make everything a little more still. It was around 9:30, and I was tired, my feet sore from a long day. I'd just finished a late meeting and didn't feel like walking the longer, busier route. I had walked this shortcut countless times before, but tonight something felt off. I couldn't quite place it at first. I chalked it up to the long day, the rain, the fact that I was tired. But as I walked, I felt this unease settle in, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The houses on either side of the street were familiar to me, old houses, with faded paint, cracked windows, and gardens that had long since seen better days. I passed them in silence, the rain tapping gently against the pavement, the occasional distant hum of a car passing by. The streetlights flickered on above me, casting pale yellow circles on the wet sidewalk. But then, about halfway down the street, something caught my eye. One of the houses. I'd passed it 1,000 times before, and yet tonight, something was wrong. The porch was different. The shutters, which had always been cracked and sagging, were now pristine, freshly painted in a bright, almost garish shade of blue. The door, which had always been chipped and weathered, was now smooth, polished wood, the kind of door you'd see in a brand new home. I stopped for a moment, staring at it. Maybe I'd never really paid attention before. Maybe I was just seeing it differently because of the rain, or maybe the house had been renovated. But something felt wrong. The air around me seemed thicker, like the world was holding its breath. I shrugged it off and kept walking, telling myself it was nothing. But as I continued down the street, more houses began to look strange. They weren't just slightly different, they were new asterisk. The house on the corner, the one with the crooked mailbox, was completely redone. The paint was fresh, the windows shiny, and the front yard was immaculately kept, not a weed in sight. I could have sworn that when I passed this way the day before, the house had been falling apart, the roof sagging with age. But now, it was perfect asterisk. I quickened my pace, a chill creeping up my spine. There was a slight dizziness in my head, the kind that comes when you're too tired, too out of it to trust your senses. I could feel my heart rate picking up, but I ignored it. I didn't want to overthink it. I had to get home, to that familiar comfort, to the quiet of my apartment. But the next house was worse. It was the one I passed most often. The one with the yellow door and overgrown garden that always seemed to have an odd mix of wildflowers and weeds. I had always liked it. It had character. But tonight, as I looked at it, I felt a pang of panic. The house wasn't yellow anymore. It was white. The garden was pristine, not a single wildflower in sight. The stone pathway that had always been cracked and uneven was now smooth and neat, leading up to a sleek, modern door. I stopped in front of it, my breath catching. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This house. This wasn't right, It had never looked like this. I could have sworn that just this morning, it had looked exactly the same as it always had, old, overgrown, faded. But now, it was brand new. I could see the faint shimmer of fresh paint on the walls, the light reflecting off the windows in a way that was too clean, too perfect to be real. I turned to look behind me, a nagging feeling crawling over me. The street was still quiet, but everything felt off. The lights above were flickering more now, and the rain was heavier, beating against the ground with a soft but persistent rhythm. I looked at the houses once more, trying to make sense of it. The houses that should have been aging, settling into the earth, felt wrong, too polished, too pristine. I walked faster, my steps echoing in the emptiness. The rain was coming down harder now, the sky darker, and the streets seemed to stretch longer than they should. The houses on my left and right, once so familiar, now felt like strangers. I thought of the faces of the neighbors I had seen countless times, of the dogs that used to bark at me from the porch. None of them were here anymore. In fact, there was no sign of life at all. No cars in the driveways, no lights in the windows, no voices in the air. It was too quiet. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but I could feel the panic rising. This wasn't right. This street, these houses, they weren't mine. They weren't the ones I'd walked past every day. I had lived in this neighborhood for years. Asterisk, I knew these houses, asterisk. But now, as I looked around, I felt like I was in the wrong place. Like I had walked into some warped, distorted version of my neighborhood. I reached the end of the street, the place where I would usually turn to head home. But when I reached the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The street that should have been there, the street I always turned onto, wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was a new road. It wasn't a major street, but a small, unmarked path, cobblestone and winding. It led off into the trees, the shadows of the branches casting long, twisted shapes on the ground. The lights along the path were dim, casting pools of yellow light that barely cut through the darkness. I took a hesitant step toward it, my heart pounding. The world around me felt like it was shifting again, the ground beneath my feet unsteady, like I wasn't walking through the same reality anymore. I could hear a faint sound, like whispers, just at the edge of my hearing, but when I turned to look, there was no one. Only the same empty, perfect houses, standing still in the rain. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, hoping for some semblance of normalcy. It was a message from a friend, one I hadn't heard from in days. I opened it, my fingers trembling, hoping for some sign of normalcy. But the message was short, just a few words. Asterisk, are you okay? The street looks different.
Where are you?
Asterisk, I stared at the screen, my stomach dropping. The rain started to fall harder, and the world around me seemed to press in, the shadows of the trees stretching longer, the houses around me growing more alien by the second. I looked back at the new street, the path that led into the unknown. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if I was standing in the place I thought I was, or if I had wandered into somewhere else entirely. I didn't walk down the path. I turned around, quickly, and began to walk back. But as I retraced my steps, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The houses, they were changing again. The paint was peeling off, the gardens overgrown with weeds, the windows dark. They were old now, aging, falling apart. The house on the corner was back to its crooked mailbox and sagging roof. The yellow door was faded and chipped again. I couldn't stop myself from looking back one last time. The new street was gone. The cobblestone path, the dim lights, all vanished. Everything was as it was. Or at least, I thought it was. But somewhere in my gut, I knew that what I had seen, the perfect houses, the new road, the unfamiliarity of my own neighborhood, it wasn't just a trick of the light. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure if it had been me, or if the world around me had changed while I wasn't looking. But I couldn't stay. The rain fell harder now, the echo of my footsteps louder in the empty street. But I walked faster, head down, trying not to look at the houses around me. Something was wrong, and I had no idea how to get back. I was walking down the familiar street, the one I always took home after work. The evening was turning colder, and the streetlights were flickering to life, one by one, as the sky deepened into a dusky blue. My mind wasn't really focused on this. It never was at this hour. The routine of the walk had settled into a quiet rhythm, just the soft click of my shoes against the sidewalk and the hum of distant traffic. As I passed by the row of shops, my eyes absent-mindedly skimmed over the usual store windows. The familiar sight of displays, mannequins, and the reflection of the street behind me. The usual things. The kind of mundane, everyday reflection you barely pay attention to. But that's when I saw her. She wasn't there at first. Not in the window anyway. But as I walked past the store, the reflection shifted. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow moving where it shouldn't. But then, I saw her face clear and unmistakable, staring back at me from the reflection in the glass. She was standing in the same spot I was walking past, but the strange thing was, I hadn't seen her when I turned the corner. It was almost like she had appeared out of thin air, and yet, she was there. Her face was pale, with sharp features, almost too sharp. Her eyes dark but intense. She wore a long coat that seemed to hang a little too loosely on her frame. And her hair, dark and slightly messy, framed her face in a way that made it hard to look away. I could see the way her lips barely moved, as if she was speaking, but there was no sound, just the soft hum of the world around me. I stopped in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. I stared at her in the reflection, frozen. She wasn't moving, not at first. But as I continued to watch, my breath catching in my throat, I saw her lips shift ever so slightly, like she was smiling, but it was not a smile I recognized. It was not the kind of smile that holds warmth or familiarity. It was cold, unsettling, the kind of smile that made your skin crawl, like she knew something you didn't. I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to look closer. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe I was imagining things. But no, there she was, still in the reflection. And then, it happened. The sound of the street faded into the background. I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. The reflection of the woman moved. She stepped forward, toward the glass, but I hadn't seen her move from where she stood. The weirdest part was, the closer she came, the more she looked like she was stepping out of the glass. I blinked, trying to make sense of it, but her figure was no longer just a reflection. She was coming through the glass. I couldn't move. My legs felt frozen in place, my mind screaming at me to run, to get away, but I was paralyzed. She was so close now, her figure looming as she seemed to step out of the window and into the space in front of me, like a ghost materializing from the very air. And then, she was standing there, no longer in the reflection but right in front of me, as if she had always been there. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my hands clammy. She was so close now, so real, and yet, there was something ethereal about her. She didn't look like a person, not entirely. There was an almost wrong feeling about her, like she existed in two worlds at once, as though her very presence was a distortion in the fabric of reality itself. She tilted her head slightly, and the smile on her face didn't fade. It was the same eerie, knowing smile. Her eyes never left mine. I took a hesitant step back, the world around me suddenly feeling asterisk off asterisk, the sounds, the lights, the very air. Nothing seemed to make sense. She was standing too still, her gaze too intense. My breath caught in my throat, and before I could even think about moving away, she spoke. "You've been waiting for me." I didn't know how to respond. I couldn't even comprehend what she was saying. My mind was racing, spinning with confusion and fear. Who was she? Why did she say that? Waiting for her. I didn't even know who she was. She took a step closer. Her movements were unnervingly fluid, like she was gliding across the pavement, her feet barely touching the ground. I instinctively took another step back, but my legs felt like they were moving through mud. I couldn't move fast enough, couldn't get away. "Don't be afraid," she said, her voice soft, almost coaxing, but there was nothing comforting in her words. "I'm just here to collect what's mine." What do you mean?" My voice came out shaky, barely a whisper. "I don't know you." She smiled again, that same unnerving, cold smile, and in that instant, I understood something I didn't want to understand. Her smile wasn't just a smile. It was a promise. A promise of something I wasn't ready to face, something deep and unsettling. "You know me," she said softly, her voice now almost a whisper, as though she were speaking to herself, "better than you think." Suddenly, the world around me seemed to distort again. The lights flickered, the street seemed to stretch and bend unnaturally, and the sound of the traffic faded. All that remained was the soft hum of her voice, her words sinking deep into my mind like a slow drip of cold water. "I've been here before," she said, her voice almost a melody. "You've seen me before. You just don't remember. But that's all right. You will." I felt a rush of panic surge through me, my heart hammering in my chest. I took another step back, my breath coming quicker now. The strange sensation of being pulled into something I couldn't escape, overwhelming me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real. You're not real." But she wasn't listening. Her eyes never left mine as she took another step closer, until I could feel the coldness of her presence, like ice seeping into my very bones. The smile never left her face. She wasn't just stepping out of the glass. She was becoming the glass. She was becoming everything. And then, with one final, chilling smile, she reached out to me. I tried to pull away, to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. Her fingers brushed my skin, cold and sharp like glass itself, and for a split second, I felt myself slipping, like I was fading away, being pulled into the reflection with her. The next thing I knew, the world snapped back to normal. I was standing in front of the store, alone. The street was bustling again, the lights steady above, the sounds of the city returning. My heart was still racing, but everything felt too real, too solid. The window was just a window again. No woman, no smile. I blinked and looked around. No one seemed to notice me, or, if they did, they weren't concerned. I felt a chill down my spine, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Still, As I turned and walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. That something had stepped out of the glass and was still with me.